welcome to Spotlights. This is the podcast for the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. And this week, I'm really happy to welcome onto the show Dr. Jacob J. Erickson. Jake, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Excited to
So
be here.
you are assistant professor of theological ethics in the School of Religion at Trinity College, Dublin.
Yeah.
And so, I'm in California right now. We're about like 8 hours apart. So I appreciate the just the temporal incongruity of some of these meetings.
Yeah, that's right.
Thanks for being on here. I want to just hear a little bit about your work in general, and then I also want to get your reactions to the American Academy of Religion's virtual meeting that just ended. But first, say a little about yourself. What is the kind of work you're up to, and what kind of maybe publications you have coming out soon?
Yeah, little self-publicity mode. So my main research has been in a kind of double stream and constructive theology on ecological forms of mysticism and questions of climate ethics and Anthropocene studies in all of that diversity. Largely. And so my dissertation was on what was called the theopoetics of the earth, divinity in the Anthropocene, and kind of traced some possible theological traditions of epiphany and theophany and the ways that those mystical traditions might help think through some of the issues of attentiveness and beauty and the complexity that happens in the wake of global warming. So I'm more interested in the ethics of resilience and adaptation and what it means to live sort of in the wake of some of these issues that we've for a long time have been thinking about how do we prevent them from happening.
Right.
So my early work was sort of on that shift already, but I've also in that incorporate quite a bit of queer theory, and so have a project on what I'm calling irreverent theology, sort of a queer ecological riff on Marcella Altos Reed's indecent theology and the ways that we think about reverence and what we revere and what we don't, and how we might embody a kind of, in Christian theological traditions, perhaps a kind of holy irreverence for some of these big theological concepts like nature and God that have haunted us in some pretty profoundly harmful ways. Yeah. And then alongside of that, I think there's an affective stream that kind of flows through my research. So the attentiveness to these moments of wounded beauty and theophany, the kind of irony and irreverence of queer ecology, and then that kind of leads to my main book project right now, which is on climate affects, emotions, and feelings. So a book with Fortress Press that I'm working on for next year, sort of tentatively titled "On the Flood Tide of History, Climate Grief, and the Theopoetics of Planetary Feeling," and that's a mouthful, so it's probably going to get shortened down. But the Theopoetics of Planetary Feeling piece is really important to me. I'm trying to think through the ways that we talk about climate grief and environmental despair, the complexities of all of the kind of negative affects and emotions that get clustered into the ways that we talk about climate change in the moment, and how those might move us, and how we might think through those to movements of justice and climate justice. So that's kind of the broad sweep of everything.
That's a lot. Yeah, you pulled together a lot. It's one of the reasons I really enjoy your work. It's very like interdisciplinary, or really even transdisciplinary, right? You don't just get caught in the disciplines. You really feel like you're talking about our moment. And that's, one of those things. Sometimes I read people talking about climate grief and I'm like, this is making me feel better. It's really leaning into the grief and really getting into the spiritual depths of that is actually very, very healing. So yeah, I really appreciate that. And I appreciate, some of your writing is in things like religion dispatches and some of these, more popular, accessible forums. So you're not just getting too caught in academics talking to other academics. So I think
Yeah.
that's really important, right? Religion as a kind of public facing scholarship, and
Yeah,
really
and
appreciate that.
it's so funny because I don't necessarily find it to be a kind of something that I do on the side. Like I find that actually some of the theological depth and complexity of concepts come out when I have an afternoon and I sit down and write a short blurb. It's almost like the old uh, environmental writing practice of observational journals or something like that. These like quick, brief moments come out, and conceptually something usually deeper emerges because it's in conversation with a larger community in the first place. And I can't do my work without that.
Right, right. And then you can just add extra footnotes and references and all that kind of stuff after.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
that's
yeah.
great. That's a good lesson for people. Like that's not just the side job. Oh, I guess I should say something to the masses. The poor unwashed masses need to hear some wisdom. Like no, that's a
Yeah,
creative way to get some thoughts out there.
yeah, yeah.
Um, well, so for the AAR, really curious to hear, before we start talking about panels and things, what did you think of the overall structure of that, right? Virtual conference, how did that go for you? Too much Zoom, not enough Zoom?
Yeah, yeah. I saw a meme yesterday that was something like, "Is it Zoom fatigue or is it just the weight of all of the different taxing obligations that we have on ourselves that
Right.
are sort of feeding into that larger context?" And I actually found the meeting really invigorating. Actually, I think it was one of these. It might just be the practiced way that I look forward to AAR every year as a kind of place to tune into my communities, to see what other people are thinking. It's clearly a very different kind of year, but that energy of reconnection was there in a lot of the sessions that I would normally attend. I think it sounds a bit uh, like an aside, but the amount of gratitude that there was for people seeing one another was really striking to me, and the numbers of ways that that was actually expressed. So that was kind of refreshing to make those forms of reconnection in the scholarly academy that we often find we need anyway. But in this year in particular, for me, that was particularly important. Um, I kept thinking of two things during it: space and time, and the ways that our bodies and the materiality of the meeting was happening all the time. I kept reverting to thinking about, okay, what's the material infrastructure that's making this meeting happen, and what does that look like, and what's the energy use when we normally would be talking about the
Right.
material impacts of the hotels and the airplanes and stuff. I
Exactly.
suddenly found myself asking those questions in a digital frame. And then the time moment that the way that it was so spread over these last weeks of the term, I think that got a little bit exhausting for me, is thinking, wait, is the conference actually over yet? No, no, no,
Right.
another week. Um, but the beauty of it was that with all of the sessions that were being recorded, I found myself constantly going back and dipping into multiple different sessions at any given time, even if I wouldn't stay for a whole 20-minute paper or something like that. I found myself engaging in these kinds of bricolage reflections of going back to a panel that had happened last Tuesday and listening in for 5 minutes and finding something profound that would spin me off into a different set of reflections. So there's this, I don't know if it's just kind of the ecology of the thing, for lack of a better term, was just a really interesting kind of temporal experience. And I think I have a lot of gratitude for the amount of sessions that were recorded. I mean, I think um, looking forward, even if we didn't have time during the conference itself to go to a number of panels, it's really likely that I'm going to be ending up having gone to more panels for this AAR than I would have at any normal AAR itself.
Yep.
So the capaciousness of that is really interesting to me.
Yeah.
as
Yeah,
well.
that was my
So
experience too. It's like I think I'm actually going to more things because of the recordings. And
yeah,
otherwise, normally you go to a couple panels even in a day, you're just exhausted and you're just like, all right, I'm gonna go take a long dinner and hang out with some friends. And but yeah, in this case, it's easy to keep that energy up and keep revisiting things. Or if I heard somebody say something really good and I couldn't write down the note, I was like, that's okay. I can watch the video later and go back and get that full quote. So
yeah,
yeah, it's
exactly.
interesting. There was actually more opportunities for connection that way. It's so easy to be like,
Yeah,
it's going to be online, less connection. Again, it's different, but this can be more connection in a way.
yeah, yeah. I mean, and I find with like the evening events and receptions that oftentimes by the second or third day, my body is tired in a multiplicity of ways, and so uh, I always tend to take some self-care breaks in the middle of AER itself, and it just um, that spread out time and that recording time just allowed for more resilience. But of course, the social and the everyday dimensions of running into somebody that you adore or had wanted to talk to or ask a question to about whatever they're working on, those didn't happen, and I think something's really lost actually when that
Yeah,
isn't there. And I think we know that, but it's helpful to name the things that are lost in that ordinary encountering way.
yeah. Missed a lot of handshakes and hugs. Like,
Yeah,
that's such a big part of it. And oh, hey, yeah, seeing people in the
yeah,
halls and things like that, or huddling
yeah,
around waiting for the coffee to show up.
yeah. I mean, handshakes, hugs, but also, I mean, positive in many respects, but also, for better or worse, also missing a lot of the anxieties that are in the room and the complexities of a guild, right? Where we're
Right.
a community of folks who some folks get along, some folks don't even, right? But but just the humanness of that, I think I missed a lot, and the effective energy of that climate.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Um, well, I want to talk about some panels. I know you did a bunch of things, especially because you are chairing a section unit, right? And then also doing some presenting. One of the things I really enjoyed was the book panel on John Caputa's book about Martin Luther. And this is a rare example of John Caputo getting into cosmology, right? And
yes.
normally kind of shies away from that a little. It seems like influences made from Catherine Keller have kind of opened up a little more cosmic dimension. So I wonder if you could say a little something about that book, about your perspective on it, what you were talking about.
Yeah, yeah. It was a really interesting. It's a really interesting book. It's Cross and Cosmos: A Theology of Difficult Glory, and I mean, I think it's firstly interesting to see Jack Caputo move into um, a more robust, even if naming it weak, theological kind of register. But yeah, little background. I mean, I chair the Sacred Text Theory and Theological Construction Unit, and I also sit on the steering committee for the Martin Luther and Global Lutheran Traditions Unit. And I come out of a kind of Lutheran constructive theological bent. That's some of my formation. And this book really popped out to me because it's meant to be an offering on the 500th sort of noting of the Heidelberg Disputation from Luther in 1519. Um, and it's those theses, for those of you who are sort of in the know on Luther or not, a number of those theses become what are noted as Reformation distinctions of the quote unquote Lutheran theology of the cross. This idea that a theologian of the cross calls evil evil and calls a thing for what it is. They're kind of poetic statements, but they have a kind of orientation to them about epistemologically seeing suffering in the world and engaging in it, and avoiding forms of glory. There's all kinds of Reformation histories that are entangled in that, but it's been interesting to see the ways that contemporary theologians have kind of turned back to those as a way of navigating and seeing different forms of social injustice as an
Mm.
epistemological term rather than a big um, soteriological salvation
Right.
history mode. And I think that's what
Mm.
drew Jack to it too, is that there's this way of navigating the world and seeing the world that is attendant and attention giving to the real life crucifixions and lynchings and ecological degradations that need to be named, so much so in the present. And so the first half of the book, Cross, kind of does that. And the second half of the book goes into this ecological cosmo um, vein, which is engaged with Catherine Keller's work. But it's he very much wants to not call it cosmological. I think the logos of the metaphysics and having a really sweet tight knit cosmology kind of makes him shy away a little bit. But he does want to talk about cosmopoetics and the material sort of flesh of the cosmos that emerges. And that's where the subtitle comes in really strongly. I think this theology of difficult glory, rather than Luther's emphasis on theology of the cross versus a theology of glory. Caputo wants the naming of the cross, but also this kind of attention to the glories of material flesh. And there's a long, complex argument in that second half, but it was really fun to engage and to think what does this older story of the theology of the cross have to offer for thinking through contemporary ecological crises or cosmopoetic or I would want to maintain some cosmological narrative in that a little bit. But it was a great panel with Merit Tralstad and Sigurdur Gudmarsdottir and Anthony Bateza, all giving very different takes on a number of things. But it was just a really interesting place to see this eco-theology, this old theology, and in the heart of the Martin Luther and Global Lutheran Traditions unit, just having this really robust conversation. It was a brilliant panel, it really was.
Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot. And it's evidence that so many panels are doing ecologically themed work. It's not at all restricted to the religion ecology unit or the animals and religion unit. You know, some of them are so explicitly about it, but even like, you know, Neoplatonism got into nature and stuff. Like everybody's talking about it now, which is great. It's kind of the goal, really, right? This should be on everybody's mind to some extent.
Yeah, I mean that's what was really striking to me, is that I often found myself going to the mysticism unit, the practical theology unit, and the Neoplatonism, Platonism Neoplatonism unit that did that brilliant look at Wilhelmine Otten's book, Thinking of Nature and the Nature of Thinking, on Eriugena and Emerson, which is just a brilliant book and really needs a lot of engagement from religion and ecology folks, I think.
Yeah, and I remember, you know, Catherine Keller was giving a response to that. She was on that panel and gave a shout out to you and your work. She was like, "Oh, I know somebody who's gonna love this stuff, and check out his new book. It's coming out next year." And so, yeah, I really appreciated that. I was wondering what you think about some of these attempts of people to kind of recover nature after, I don't know, it's been like 20 years of people like Bruno Latour, Slavoj Žižek, Tim Morton, a variety of people saying maybe nature is the problem. We should focus more on ecology, you know, ecology without nature. And then people say, hold on, wait a second. Let's really look back at what nature meant, what its symbolic value was. So I wonder what you think of some of those attempts. I think Neoplatonism, they were talking about that too. Like, nature's not all bad.
Yeah. I mean, that's something that's been on my mind, because I've been seeing it more and more, not just at AAR, but in recent all kinds of discourse. Jane Bennett's new book on Walt Whitman has kind of those larger thinkings, and Jack Halberstam's book, Wild Things, on wildness, talking about wild, right? So we've got wild, nature, cosmos, all of these larger words that have there's been somewhat of a kind of postmodern deconstructive allergy to. And I like what they're doing, in the sense that there seems to be this urge to want to take the complexity and chaotic context of the concrete and see how far we can think that, and think about think about these terms nature beyond their sense of order, but into the actual messiness of the chaotic creativity of them. And I find that actually really helpful. I would suspect that at the end of the day, that the particular choice of terms, that there's common resonance between the ways that a lot of these folks are using the terms. I think it's just that, saying nature culture is really clunky in terms of language. and so I think taking some of these old words and giving them more complex and internal difference definition might be a way forward for thinking sort of larger, maybe towards a kind of universal concept, but not a singular concept, but kind of an adaptive universality, a sense of common good, a sense of planet, a sense of earth, a sense of cosmos. I go back and forth on that because it's really also important to name the ways that those terms are built into the really harmful formations of the academy and the harmful formations of scholarship. Another panel that wasn't ecology themed directly, but has so much importance was the discussion with Willie James Jennings on After Whiteness, right? So his critiques of the way that academy often forms us to think in terms of forms everyone with this kind of white male supremacy for possession, mastery, and on all of these things that have been so heavily critiqued in ecological criticism as forming harmful anthropocentrisms, right?
Yeah.
That the academy itself and some of the ways in which we conceptualize some of these larger terms precisely instrumentalize our ecological contexts and contribute to all manner of environmental racisms and sexisms. I mean, we know this, but have to name more clearly the ways that academy, whether it be in more permanent modes or whether it be in the ways that we engage it in terms of reading or in ancillary ways, that there just needs to be more sense of the ecological formation of the scholar, I think. And so AAR made me think about that a little bit more this year because I could do so from a distance, right?
Good point. Yeah. Just enough distance to be like, what exactly are we doing here?
Yeah.
And how seriously this is kind of shaping us. And yeah, it turns out to be really hard to separate the wheat from the chaff when it comes to things like nature, right? And earth and just really basic concepts.
Yeah.
I don't know if
well,
people
my farming
how...
background says that wheat and chaff are not opposites. Chaff is what you take off of the kernel of wheat, so it's about purification in that way. But sort of getting to the hunk of the thing. But yeah, it's I think was it Lori Zoloff or whose call was it a few years ago presidentially that we take sabbatical years, for instance, in terms of the travel. And I think this is one of those times in which AAR and our conference ways, we have to ask, right, what does it mean to adapt to our new context? And getting back to normal, meaning everyone flying to a city every single year, is probably not the best way of doing that. And now we have an example that it can be done in other ways, right? And what does that look like materially for us in terms of ecological impact? And does it still, what kinds of communities does it create differently? And, but we're also in a crisis moment. So reflecting on those things within it is difficult as well.
Right.
It's just the nature of the beast, so to speak.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that because I don't know if AAR would have voluntarily taken a sabbatical year. It kind of had to be forced on us, and then doing it like, okay, well, we can do this. So yeah, we'll see how it goes in the future.
Yeah.
Geez, I want to be mindful of time. You know, we're trying to keep these short, not like these, you know, you have some like 2 hour podcasts, and I enjoy some of that. And especially when I talk to folks like you who I like talking to a lot, it's really hard to stop. I don't see
Yeah.
any reason to. Like, no, let's just keep talking for a while. But you know, we should kind of wrap it up. So I don't know. I want to hear one more thing though. What was your favorite panel or a favorite presentation or your favorite quote? What was the thing that out of what, a 10-day, 11-day conference? What was the thing that's sticking with you most right now?
Yeah, I there are two things that have been sticking with me quite a bit. Um, One was John Tatamanel's book panel, Circling the Elephant. I apparently went to a lot of book panels, which is all right. But talking about it was a comparative theology of religious diversity. But one of the things that he really came around to, he used that metaphor of the blind or blindfolded men and the elephant and getting different perspectives on a larger thing. And he made that more complex. But one thing he said is that, you know, even that in terms of our interreligious learning and multi-religious learning is also about real elephants.
Mhm.
And it was really interesting to see in a very pronounced comparative theology space being also self-consciously eco-theological, that really to think about ecological crises must be done in an interreligious and multi-religious learning frame in a lot of ways, if anything's going to change or transform or get done. So that's been on my mind quite a bit. And the other was William Naughton's book panel, because I think uh, John Scott Erickson has so much to teach us, and that's what she was bringing back. And Eriugena being this sort of one of these historical thinkers that was accused of pantheism and therefore dropped from a lot of Christian theological reflection. But I find for him, in engaging and reading him, I find so much learning for myself personally, but also academically about concepts of nature and attention and things like that. So that sense of diversity paired with this sense of that there are still older traditions and lineages that might offer different possibilities for us that we still haven't explored. We haven't exhausted the texts that have been overlooked yet, and the importance that work needs to continue with. So that's kind of.
That's beautiful. Those are two really good insights in a nutshell. I really feel that the urgency of doing interreligious, multicultural work, but also realizing that we haven't exhausted the resources in any single tradition, and
That's
we can
right.
keep digging the stuff up. Some things that were dismissed as heresy might actually have been pretty good things. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's my prediction. Pantheism 2021, it's coming back.
I think so, and Mary Jane Rubenstein has sort of pointed us towards that, and I think, yeah, I think pantheism is going to be a huge topic of conversation in the next 5 years at least, especially.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's good to be
Jake
with you.
Erickson, really great to talk to you always. We'll have to have you back on to chat about more stuff because you're always really staying on top of a lot of really interesting developments, and I always learn a lot from talking to you.
Yeah.
So thanks for being on the show, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week with some more stuff, and eventually we'll probably stop talking about the AAR. It was a long conference, so there's a lot to process from it. So we'll be back with more next week. In the meantime, take care and be well.